Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to our conversation on densification and the evolution of the RAN for a report by Sensafield in collaboration with RCR Wireless News. Today, we talk about coverage in a football stadium in Charlotte, Carolina. And I have with me James Hammond, the Director of Information Technology with the Carolina Panthers, and Kevin Schmonsees, the CTO and owner of Beam Wireless. James and Kevin, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, so to get started, I usually talk to operators, and this is different because with densification, we are moving towards more infrastructure in the venues, and stadiums are the best example in terms of high usage. It's a highly challenging environment. So can you give us an introduction about what is that you do personally, and what is that what kind of infrastructure you have in the stadium?
Yes, thank you. So basically here at Bank of America Stadium, we were faced with a problem over the past 2 or 3 years where our fans were not able to really get the kind of connectivity that they expect. They would come into the game, they would want to be able to do Twitter, Facebook, they'd want to take selfies. They want to do all the things that they're used to doing in their regular lives involving social networking and connectivity. Well, it got to the point where the number of fans trying to get onto social networking and the internet in general was exceeding the capacity of our systems. It doesn't matter if they were using Wi-Fi or if they're using the cellular systems for their data, they weren't able to get through. That was leading to fan dissatisfaction. About that point, they hired me, and I think one of the reasons they hired me was to tackle these problems. So as soon as I got to the Carolina Panthers, I started examining the systems that we had in place, examining both the DAS system for rebroadcasting those cellular signals, as well as the Wi-Fi systems, and found that they both really were not keeping up with fan demands. They were primarily under-designed for a much smaller user population, making them what I would consider to be obsolete, say, 5-year-old designs. At that point, we decided to bring on new systems, and that meant ripping and replacing the entire DAS infrastructure, as well as the Wi-Fi infrastructure.
Okay, Kevin, what about you?
Sure. So with Beam Wireless, my business partner, Michelle Rhodes, and I started the company basically where we saw a gap in the industry where there's frustration with venue owners, just like the Carolina Panthers, where basically they don't have the visibility, they don't have the control of a DAS inside of their venue. So what we try to do is provide the consulting, whether it's design, whether it's the contracts with the carriers, validation, optimization, to basically allow them to own, manage, and have full control and visibility of a DAS system in their venue.
Yeah, and I think that before we get into sort of the technology, maybe we can talk about the ownership structure here, because this is a big debate in the industry right now. Who should own and control the infrastructure? And it seems like you wanted to have control of the infrastructure as the venue owner, rather than having an operator, a third party, run the show.
Right. That was one of the very first things I witnessed when I came here to the Panthers. We had a meeting with all of the carriers that were involved with the existing DAS system, and we could tell that there was dissatisfaction among those carriers trying to figure out were the problems on their side, was the problem on the neutral host side with the DAS, and we felt really kind of powerless being in the middle. We couldn't figure out exactly what was going on. We couldn't figure out if we needed to put pressure on this carrier or on the neutral host provider. With that lack of visibility, we just felt like we could never get to the core of the problem, and the problems were never being solved. In the meantime, all of our fans were still complaining that they were not getting the coverage that they wanted to get. So we decided we would move from a system of managed service, which was essentially what our Wi-Fi and DAS were both managed services. We had third parties that owned and managed both the Wi-Fi system as well as the DAS system. We decided we would go in there, essentially let those contracts expire, and then take over the ownership ourselves, try to find the right kinds of consultants, such as Beam Wireless, to point us in the right direction, give us the advice we needed, so that we would have the expertise on board working with us while we would maintain ownership of the system and see that full visibility and take full responsibility for it.
Yeah. So is right now is the Wi-Fi and DAS also sort of integrated, and you manage both of them, right?
Right. So in the case of the DAS system, we contracted with Beam to help us select a DAS replacement, help us do the construction, the integration, the optimization, and the ongoing maintenance. DAS is pretty complicated. I would say DAS is more complicated than Wi-Fi when it comes to the management and maintenance. So we do use their services. In the case of Wi-Fi, we also selected an integrator called Uplink. They came in and managed the construction, the integration, and are assisting us with our first year service. And then we're going to continue with the maintenance ourselves. So although we own both systems, I think the level of support we require from third parties to help us manage it, it varies depending on whether you're talking about Wi-Fi or DAS.
Mm-hmm. So the decision to take ownership, it's a difficult one because it means a lot more work on your end. Is it because you think that connectivity is something that is so crucial to you and to your fans that you want to have control? Like, I'm sure there are things that you can control, some other things that are not as important you don't control. So was that part of the reason?
Right. I mean, it is a scary thing, of course, to go from a third-party managed system to bring it in-house and taking full responsibility for that. That was a scary decision to make, but it was the right decision to make because we have a saying here. It's actually our owner, Mr. Richardson, says that the fan is the most important member of our team. And that's really important because what it shows is his emphasis is on the fan experience. So if we're finding that the fans are not getting the connectivity they demand, then we need to do something about it to fix it. Well, in order to do something about it to fix it, we really felt like we just had to take full control. And once we made that decision, started planning, starting building, we realized it was absolutely the best decision to make. I think even the carriers agree with us that moving to this new model of DAS ownership, in the end, because we have taken that full responsibility, we have such we have such high expectations that they then can get the benefits of a good system to participate in.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you have multiple carriers participating, right?
Right. So when we built the new DAS system, which was last off season, so that would be the off season of 2015, we maintained the tenants that were there before on the old system. So that means we have Verizon, AT&T, and Sprint participating, and we're currently talking to T-Mobile about also joining the DAS.
Right, and they're comfortable. Like I said, they understand that they can share the infrastructure and have comparable treatment, comparable access to the infrastructure. Correct?
I think the idea is that all the carriers are now treated fairly. There's not an anchor tenant. There's not a lead tenant. We consider all of our carriers to be the same, equal customers.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you, before we go into the sort of more the technologies part, in terms of the usage model, so it seems like in any sports event, the communication has become really an integral part of enjoying the experience. Can you comment on how does this change? What is that you see people doing differently from what we were doing in the past? Is it just more, or is it something different?
Well, new social networking apps come out every day, right? And each one of those leads to challenges. For example, a couple of years ago, I had not heard of, or perhaps it didn't exist, Periscope, for example, for being able to do live video streaming. And those pose real challenges because then we're getting into high bandwidth usage for something like a video stream. And then there's also rules about what you can do in the stadium. I mean, we're not supposed to permit a video stream of the game going out live because of usage and broadcast rights. So my point is that there's always something new coming out every day, but more importantly, I'd say it's the volume and density that has changed. So before, when you would say it was a very small percentage of our fans that are getting on and texting and tweeting and taking selfies, as I guess the age of our digital natives it gets older and older, right? We're getting more and more coming into the football stadiums. Overall, it's really the percentage of users wanting to get online that has changed the most.
But also, if I could add to that, so one of the big trends we see, and we see this not only in the Panthers stadium, but most arenas and venues across the country, is the trend from voice usage to data usage. You know, it used to be making a phone call, sending a text message. That's how they communicated during these events. Now it's Snapchat, Instagram, you know, Facebook. It's more of the data usage and the multimedia on the phone. So you can see that in the DAS statistics. And that's one key thing that the Panthers gained by having control and management of their DAS, is they actually get to see each operator's statistics after every event. So they can see what the true fan experience was per operator after every event. And then we can actually focus, if, for example, the lower bowl has a fan experience problem in a certain area, they can actually focus on that and try to improve that for the fans. They didn't have that visibility before.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned some of the applications you mentioned are also very heavy on the uplink. Do you see a change in the uplink versus downlink balance?
So that's something we're definitely watching. That's a great question. So I haven't seen a significant change yet. There's still a big load on the downlink. You know, when you compare downlink and uplink traffic, it's still heavily on the downlink. We're very curious. So far, we've had 2 events this summer. I'm curious to see how the uplink ticks, and does the downlink potentially go down? But we're still, you know, takers, not givers. It's kind of the expression that they use. So definitely watching it.
Mm-hmm. Right, absolutely. And okay, so let's talk a little bit about the decisions when you have to, you know, so first of all, you have to have Wi-Fi and cellular. What is the balance between the two? And obviously, I would say you need both, but some people might disagree with that. But how do you see the relationship between Wi-Fi and cellular?
Right. I was asked this question many times by management here at the Panthers, trying to figure out, hey, if we make our DAS so wonderful, why do we even care about Wi-Fi? Or on the other hand, you know, if our Wi-Fi is really great, why do we need DAS? Because they don't need to get onto the cellular data. I do not see how you can avoid having both. In a large venue, you're going to have a good DAS system and a good Wi-Fi system. DAS can only, first of all, each system can only go so far individually. So if you've got 2 different systems, that right there is going to help your density problem. Second, you're going to have expectations from the fans. So they may come into a stadium with excellent DAS, and then they may realize, hey, I don't want to pay for my cellular data. Not everybody's got free data. So they're going to want that free Wi-Fi. I think you're going to have the fan demand driving the need for both. You're going to have the overall density requirements driving the need for both. Yeah.
Oh, and are you looking into using LTE in the unlicensed bands? So with LTE-U or multifier, so that you can use LTE unlicensed, but then LTE would obviously compete with Wi-Fi for spectrum. Have you looked at all into that?
I think we should probably both answer this question. I'm going to start by saying, no, I need the spectrum for Wi-Fi. But I'm going to let Kevin also.
I'll say, please use it. Yeah, because you know, it's funny because I handle the DAS side. You know, the expectation would probably be that I wouldn't care that much about the Wi-Fi. I am thrilled to see the new Wi-Fi system going into the stadium, because the biggest help for the DAS is to have that Wi-Fi data offload. It's extremely important to have both systems in place. We need to offload Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi needs to offload us. Not everybody's going to attach to a Wi-Fi system. And like he said, not everybody's going to want to pay for data to stay on the cell phone system. So they really have to work together. It's extremely important to have them both.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add to that, it's been interesting as we actually built the new DAS system first. It was the off-season of 2015, and the new Wi-Fi system was installed the off-season of 2016. So we just finished that construction. But as we were doing that construction, I've actually been approached by 2 of those carriers wanting to talk about what kind of agreements they can work out with me in order to do offload. Now, these are the same carriers that are on our excellent DAS system. So you can see they're very interested in all systems working together, because they recognize the density problem. You only have so much space in Wi-Fi, you only have so much space in DAS. So by having them both, they definitely can help complement each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yes, sometimes people see them in competition, but you really need them both to make the best of you know, the limitations that you have. Okay, so now let's switch back to the DAS side. When you decided, were you looking at other options as well? You could have been looking at small cells, I don't know, or just have the macro improvements. I mean, to have the macros run in the stadium to be improved, I guess you would not have control. But did you look at other options as well?
Sure. So macro won't be able to cover the stadium. There's too many fans. A sector or two coming in from an outdoor macro is not going to be able to handle the capacity. So that's not really an option. Small cells really a loosely used term. So a small cell originally had a very minimum capacity count. It could only handle 70 users. So same thing, that's not really feasible for a football stadium. The newer term that people use for small cells is really just a lower power radio. And that is actually used to feed the DAS. What a lot of people call a small cell now is a 5-watt radio. But the original term small cell that's used, say, for like an office building or something like that, it's really not feasible for a bowl of a football stadium.
Right. And in terms of different types of DAS, how did you go about selecting the one you selected?
Sure. Yeah. I tell you, that's about the time that I got in contact with Kevin here from Beam, and I was able to I think we were able to quickly narrow it down to three different DAS types, and then I did some field visits, went out to other stadiums and took a look at what they had, and we narrowed it down to the final choice, which was CommScope ION-U. But now we're kind of getting into the technical side, and I'll let Kevin explain why maybe ION-U was the final choice.
Sure. So this was one of the most important things in the DAS, and that the Panthers really did right, and is one of the reasons we started our company, and we see the gap. So we literally had a whiteboard session, and that's what I encourage any venue that wants to enter the system, is to have this technical whiteboard session where James and I sat down on a whiteboard, and we drew out every manufacturer and every product line for that manufacturer to discuss what the pluses and minuses would be for the Carolina Panthers. Because the product line of CommScope ION-U that we decided to select here might not be the best product line for another football stadium, but then their product line might not be best for the Carolina Panthers. So, for example, with ION-U, some of the reasons that we selected that product line was, number one, it comes in what's called a NEMA-rated unit. We needed to put remote amplifiers outdoors where they could be hit by rain and wind and cold weather, hot weather. The ION-U product line had that. We needed an amplifier that was a little bit more robust as far as power, because all of the carriers were going to share that power. We weren't going to have separate amplifiers because of cost and aesthetics. They all needed to share that one unit. So the ION-U, again, had a good power level where it could feed antennas at the correct power. Some other reasons were some of the optimization things that the ION-U had. For example, we can actually go in and we can attenuate every remote per band during optimization, and that's extremely important because a lot of the older product lines didn't have this capability, and it's really come in handy now. There are also a lot of maintenance advantages that we talked through on the whiteboard with, say, for example, ION-U that we selected. There's what's called a PIM test inside the ION-U, and so every year something very important during an audit is that we go through and make sure all of the passive infrastructure is still in good shape. For example, the antennas, the cabling, the splitters. How has that been impacted throughout the season? We can actually put this PIM tone through every amplifier in the system very quickly and efficiently. We can even do it remotely and test all of that passive infrastructure. It's very important to do every year. So again, we went through that whiteboard session, and in the end, the pluses for CommScope ION-U outweighed the rest of the product.
Yeah. So is it a passive DAS?
No, it's an active DAS. Yeah. So, and just to kind of talk on that, I mean, obviously, the active versus passive, the big key with a passive, that would be if you had a radio just feeding where the DAS is only, say, coax, antennas, there are no active equipment. CommScope ION-U has an active amplifier that's fiber fed and then amplifies through the antenna.
Yeah. So now, no matter how good your system is, both Wi-Fi and DAS, at some point you're going to see congestion because people will try to use it the most they can. What's your experience with that? You can't avoid it, but you have to manage it. So how do you manage congestion when you see it?
Let me take this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So right now, because the DAS is fairly new, we've been through one full season. The DAS is not going to be the bottleneck. It's basically a very wide interstate or highway that can handle any traffic that the base stations have been sending through it. The bottleneck right now would be the operator's base station. So, for example, the DAS as it sits today is designed for 48 zones. So you do 48 sectors of traffic per band, per operator. The most we have running today is 32 sectors from one of the operators. Last season, the most that we had was 24 sectors from one of the operators. So that's really where the bottleneck comes from, is when it hits their sector limitation, how many users can their radios handle. For example, last year, if we take one operator, our failure point was 15 gigabytes on the LTE download in 15 minutes. This year, that same operator has gone from, say, 18 sectors to 24 sectors, and now they've exceeded 28 gigabytes in the same 15-minute period without failure. So again, without changing the DAS from last year to this year, they just increased their base station capacity. That bottleneck no longer exists. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah. So when you have congestion, from the user perspective, what do the people see? I mean, obviously the quality goes down, but for how long? Can you?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. So, we have to talk about congestion in two manners, right? With voice calls and data. So voice calls, I don't think we have to discuss, because the trend really has gone from voice to data. We don't see any voice congestion on the CAS at all. From an LTE data, which is really, if you're going to see congestion, that's where we're seeing it. It's typically what happens is our uplink tanks. That's the first thing we see in stats. Basically, when I say tanks, in other words, uplink throughputs normally will be, say, several megabytes per second, suddenly go down to like 0.1 or 0.05. So the noise rise in that zone gets so high that the customers can no longer either communicate with the base stations, or their throughput is so slow, the information never gets through. So to a customer, what actually happens is all of a sudden it's like it doesn't work, right? Their data worked 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden during, say, halftime, which is the busiest time during an event, the device just doesn't seem to work anymore. So what we see is then the payload doesn't increase, but the attempts increase. So what you see is people continuously hammering the system trying to get through.
So I guess what you see is like it's a vicious circle. So everybody's trying to do, and nothing really goes through until you kind of relax and then start all over again.
Right. Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so and I guess that's something you have to manage, and I guess there is more like people understand that every now and then the network slows down and then picks up again. So there is, I guess, some growing acceptance of that. Now, moving forward, as you said, you were unhappy with the previous system because it was engineered for a much lower capacity. Now, as we move forward, if you look at it 7 years from now, you're going to see much bigger need for capacity. How are you keeping up? What is that you can do, or what is that? Are there new technologies? What's going to allow you to keep going and increase capacity?
It's a great question. So like I mentioned today, the most that any carrier has is 32 sectors on the DAS. Mm-hmm. The DAS proper was designed for 48 sectors. When we talk about what it was designed for, what that means is SINAR and CQI, which are very important quality terms that every operator speaks towards, and it basically applies to the fan experience. CQI, channel quality indicator. SINAR is basically your signal to interference ratio. And that truly, when we look at statistics after an event, if the CQI in one zone is bad versus another, the users in that zone will have a bad experience. So what we do is we design the system at, say, 48 sectors for a certain SINAR level. And that's based on a certain percentage load on the carrier's base station. Once it exceeds that, then we'll have to come back and modify the DAS. We have put things in place of, okay, once we hit the 48 sectors in, let's say, 4 years, where do we go from there? And we do have a very clear path. We were actually talking about it earlier today at lunch. 48 sectors, okay, time to go over that. In the bowl, you've pretty much hit your limit, okay? The only way to get more sectors in a bowl is new antennas are gonna have to come out, which they come out every year. Different beam widths, new bands that the FCC licensed. To give you an idea, whether it's the WCS band with AT&T, whether it's new AWS bands for T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint's using their BRS band up in that 2.5, 2.6 gig range. That's what's going to happen. It's whether it's RF, whether it's noise, whether it's flashlights, doesn't matter. You only put so much of it in one section where it doesn't become efficient anymore. So that's where additional frequencies have to come into play.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to mention, the simplest thing we can do to address congestion is to ask our carriers to simply give us more. In other words, if we have 48 zones that are available to them right now in our infrastructure, they need to use all 48 rather than simulcasting their sectors across that. So right now, I think our carrier with the most sectors is 32. We have 48 zones available, but they're only providing enough gear to use 32 sectors, which means they're having to grab some of our zones and simulcast them into one sector each. So the first thing is the easiest thing, and that is simply tell the carriers, add more capacity. We can take that. In other words, this great big highway can take it. As Kevin said, you just need to add more lanes, and that's really on the carriers.
Yeah. So I guess that from your point of view, you're ready for more capacity as long as the operators come in and put the investment, and when they see that they need capacity, they're likely to put that investment because it's clearly to their advantage to provide it.
And we push and discuss that with them. I mean, that's where we can consult with them, and the fact that we have everyone's statistics, we can compare the statistics, and we can really push them in directions of saying, hey, you have a capacity issue, let's say in this one concourse and suite area. Next season or in mid-season even, you need to double your capacity in this area. But again, the DAS is prepared for that.
And if we're doing our jobs right, the carriers are, Beam is, Panthers are, what that really means is we're going to have little or no congestion. So rather than accepting that congestion is going to happen, we don't want to accept that. We want to say that we're going to have little to no congestion because we want to meet the fans' demands.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess that's crucial here is that you understand what the network is doing today. So as soon as you see usage getting close to capacity, you say, okay, time out, we need to sort out the problem, and then you move forward with that.
And it was, last season was a real key season because that's our baseline going forward. If you think about it, like James said, we had a new DAS installed for last season. So we didn't know what kind of traffic it was truly going to take. The old DAS, wasn't anywhere near what the new DAS was. I mean, to give you an idea, from the final playoff game with the previous DAS for a 4.5 to 5 hour football game, compared to a soccer game that's an hour and a half, 2 hours as far as the fans in the stadium, it covered or carried 7 times the traffic of that football game in that soccer game. No one had any idea how much traffic the system would carry. So because of that, one of the operators actually mid-season doubled their capacity on the DAS, which to me that's unheard of, to see an operator come in and then mid-season realize, hey, you know what, we need to double our capacity, and their stats immediately improve.
Yeah, because I guess that the issue is that you don't necessarily see usage if you don't have capacity, because people try and give up. Right. So it's only when you have the capacity that you see what's the real demand.
Exactly. For
the service. So until you just put it out there, you might not see that there is all this sort of latent demand out there.
Well, that's, these operators, they do their capacity planning on a national level. They don't do it on a local level. So, if an AT&T or Verizon, when they start planning out the capacity per venue, they're going to pull their statistics from previous years. So for the Carolina Panthers, for example, AT&T, Verizon are going to pull their capacity based on how much traffic the old system used to carry. So They deploy that capacity, and then you have a new system that carries 7 times the traffic or 6 times the traffic. They didn't prepare for that. So that's why last season was real nice. And because of that, the two carriers that didn't increase their capacity mid-season immediately increased their capacity during the summer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, James and Kevin. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. And so this was a conversation for a report on densification by Sensafili and in collaboration with RCR Wireless News. Kevin, James, thanks again for being with us today.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks. And thank you all for listening in.